For me, a good corporate conversation is one where key problems or issues get surfaced. Part of the problem within corporate organizations is that the flow of communication isn't two-way. Information might be coming sort of down the hierarchical chain of command, but there isn't necessarily the forum for that communication and knowledge and information to go back up. And so what Holacracy really does is allows conversations to happen at all parts and functions and levels of the organization in a way that any problems, any innovations, any new ideas, any challenges can be surfaced in order to be resolved.
Welcome to the Conversation Factory. I'm your host, Daniel Stillman. Each episode, I'll talk to an amazing conversation designer to try and distill insights we can all bring into our work and lives. Human conversation is a material that can be shaped by design, and shifting conversations in everyday meetings and organizations and yourself can create real change. And I hope to help you do it better and more authentically. I'd love to have you stay part of the conversation. Head over to theconversationfactory.com to sign up for my newsletter and never miss an episode. That's theconversationfactory.com. I'd also love for you to be part of the show. If there's a challenging transformation you're working through, head over to theconversationfactory.com, click coaching, and sign up for 30 minutes of free coaching that we might use on the show. Head over to theconversationfactory.com, hit coaching, and let me know what conversations you need help redesigning. Enjoy the episode. Holacracy asks a big question. How can organizations be designed in a way that really works for everyone in the organization? Right now, orgs are often structured according to power, from the top to the bottom, rather than self-management distributed throughout the organization. This slows orgs down and demotivates some people. In this episode, I talked to Sally McCutchion, a certified Holacracy coach based in the UK. Sally teaches public workshops on Holacracy and coaches orgs in making the shift to working with Holacracy. Sally and I had a seriously wide-ranging conversation. We hit on some big topics toward the end that I've placed in the extras, which you can find on the site. Check those out as they're really juicy. One conversation design principle of Holacracy is to allow information and knowledge to flow through the org. Too often, people at the edges of an org, the people closest to the users, know a lot about what's wrong and how to make it right. But those same people don't feel empowered or safe to speak up or even to just do something to shift the issues. One CEO whose organization I coached years back desperately wanted people to feel a sense of ownership. How, if you own your house and the toilet is running, you fix it, if you know how, or you talk to someone who can. You don't just let it run. Holacracy attempts to open regular channels of communication between areas of the organization and to allow sections to feel like they can solve problems that they see without asking permission, waiting for permission, identifying if permission is even possible. Holacracy designs several meetings within orgs very rigidly in order to break down power structures and allow all voices to be heard. People are expected to bring updates framed as needs, not just complaints. Other structures are a lot more open and can be adapted to the unique company requirements. It is, without a doubt, a very interesting design for organizational conversations. I get into the weeds with Sally a bit, and if you follow the links in the show notes, you might find some of the terminology and structures dizzying. But the forest and the trees of Holacracy are worth absorbing. That self-management and purpose are essential at all scales, at the scale of the person, the team, and all throughout an organization. Thanks for listening and enjoy the episode. Sally McCutchion, welcome to the Conversation Factory. Thank you so much for making the time. You are the first certified Holacracy coach I personally ever have had the pleasure of getting to talk with. And
wow, I'm honored.
I'm honored. So thanks so much for carving out some time in your day.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I feel like you're tipping the waiter before the meal, but So one of the things I'm curious about is the community of Holacracy. Because I was reading some stuff that you'd had on the web and listening to another podcast you were in. There's this idea of learning about Holacracy and then getting into its orbit, and now you're inside the orbit of Holacracy, and you are now doing public workshops and webinars and so on and so forth. So how did you go from outside of the community to on the edges of the community to being fully inside of the community?
That's a really interesting question. So, well, for me, the first time I heard the word holacracy, I was actually doing an interview with a guy in the States who considered himself to be a conscious leader. And I'd left my corporate job about 6 months earlier and was just sort of going headlong into research and networking and learning and just in this really cool kind of curious open space. And he mentioned this word holacracy to me, and I just kind of made a note of it. And I was like, okay, interesting. And that was the first time it came onto my radar. And it was actually several months later that I kind of came back round to it, which was a little bit by chance. But I discovered an organisation in the UK called Evolving Organisation. And at the time, they were the only people in the UK who were sort of exploring holacracy and working with holacracy and running workshops about it, etc. So I connected with them, again, just really out of curiosity, and became a partner within the organisation within about 48 hours of getting in touch with them. It was one of those sort of crazy synergy kind of moments. And I suppose that was the start, that was kind of the key moment, I suppose, of being outside of the community to sort of then being inside of the community. And that was about 2 years ago, just less than 2 years ago. So since then, it's just really been through sort of, ongoing networking and learning and taking the exams to get my accreditation as a holacracy coach has been a big part of it. And there's quite a big online community. So it's just been about kind of reaching out to people and just having really cool conversations. And I suppose at the minute it feels like quite a niche community as well. So there's a lot of generosity and time within the community for just sort of co-sharing and conversation and supporting each other. And yeah, these exams that I've taken and the credentials that I've got, I suppose have just meant that I've kind of become a deeper part of the community 2 years on.
That is fascinating. So it was sort of it was maybe like a slow burn, and then there was this hot start where you sort of made this really strong connection with the guys at Evolving Organizations, and then you did all the other stuff to sort of be sort of maybe kosher on Holacracy. What's the process of all of that accreditation? Like, what does that give you that if you were already sort of doing this kind of work in one way, what did you get from doing that you didn't have before then?
I mean, it's a real depth of understanding of holacracy, and when I first joined Evolving Organisation, I didn't really have any intention to become accredited in holacracy myself. I was kind of perhaps more interested in the spaces around holacracy rather than holacracy itself. And as time went on, it just became more and more obvious that actually I should get accredited in holacracy as well. And the process is quite hardcore, I would say. It's sort of, you can take various courses. Holacracy 1 run a 4.5 day course. In fact, they run 2 different courses, a practitioner and a coach course. And those courses are great, but for me, my learning really came from practice, and being part of Evolving Organisation was great for that, because it was a full 12 months of of fully practicing holacracy, being in the roles, experiencing some of the pains, the kind of the growth spurts, the interactions, how humans connect with this thing called holacracy, and how it works in business as well and in reality.
Yeah.
So that was my biggest learning curve. And then there's a series of exams. There's an online exam to become a practitioner, and then it's a 2.5-hour virtual kind of practical exam to then become a certified facilitator and coach. And that's really that's like a license. Then it's an accreditation to your experience, your depth of learning, not just of the technicalities, but of the sort of the wisdom, I suppose, of holacracy and some of the challenges that, like, it's quite a big shift in thinking. It's not just this sort of external tool. There's a real internal shift when you sort of fully understand it and fully in flow with the system. So that for me, that's what that accreditation means. It's like an acknowledgement of the depth of understanding of that, and then a license globally to be able to run the workshops and implement holacracy into organizations, which is cool. Which is fun thing to do.
Yeah, so it's pretty rigorous and lengthy. So I think you said something that was kind of interesting, where you said at the time that you met the evolving organizations people, you were interested not just in holacracy, but the spaces around holacracy. So for those of us who don't know, and I'm no expert, obviously, on self-organization and holacracy, but maybe you can just put holacracy in context. Like, maybe could you tell us, like, the origin story, how it was born, what it sort of sits in and around, and like where it's going?
That's an enormous question, Dan. Do you really expect me to answer that entire question in one go?
I do. You're a holacracy expert. The expert can make things simple. That is your job.
It was like, that question was, just tell me everything about holacracy and the universe now, please.
In my defense, I think I could do that for, like, design thinking and the history of design. Like, that's
okay.
That's that was that clanking sound you hear is in fact a gauntlet that I've just lovingly placed on the ground for you. Yeah, I mean.
Okay. I'm picking up the gauntlet now. Okay.
Thank you.
So
I'm starting the clock at 5 minutes. There you go. I think that's reasonable.
Okay. The background of holacracy. So it was created by a guy called Brian Robertson in the States, who is in my mind is quite a brilliant guy, quite a forward-thinking guy. And not only did he sort of realize, as he founded and worked in various companies, he's an entrepreneur himself, just realized that there was something wrong with the way things were working. There was too much pressure on people at the top. There wasn't enough autonomy. Issues around engagement, scaling up and maintaining a cool culture is quite difficult. Like, just a whole bunch of problems, which I guess is very aligned to the reasons why I left my last corporate job, as feeling like, oh, there's something wrong with this. There's got to be a better way. But he felt that sort of, a couple of decades ago, and then actually started really doing some cool work as to, okay, well, what can we do about this, and what's the alternative? And I think the inspiration from holacracy has come from loads of different sources, and it's an operating system that kind of pulls together loads of really cool forward-thinking ideas about how people work as an individual, how we can work together, and how you can put the purpose of the organization in such a prominent place that it means that things get done and autonomy can be given to individuals without any risk of it just turning into utter chaos, because you've got a direction and you've got sort of transparency around what's going on. You've got checks and balances in place to make sure that you can give it all this autonomy and just still feel really confident that things are going to get done in pursuit of the purpose of the organization. But the things for me that kind of fit around that, and sort of the reason behind me saying I didn't necessarily, when I first started, have a desire to sort of become a holacracy coach. I was interested in the space around it, is because Holacracy is your operating system. It's like switching from Windows to Mac within your business, but it doesn't necessarily deal with a bunch of stuff that goes around it. So, okay, if you're completely shifting your operating system, how are you going to handle compensation now? Because people still need to be paid, and how we pay people in business has been done in a certain way for decades, if not centuries. And actually, we need to look at how that might need to be more fluid, more peer-based systems, possibly fairer in terms of the ratio from the highest to the lowest paid in the organization, all that kind of stuff. Things like performance review as well, like that, again, that is generally done by your boss. There's ways that performance reviews have been around and for decades. And are they working? Are they effective? Do they suit today's market needs and today's society and the new generation of people that are coming into the workplace? Well, not necessarily. So Holacracy itself doesn't have a voice on, okay, this is how you should do compensation now, and this is how you should do your performance reviews now. And so all of those spaces are as fascinating to me as what Holacracy can bring to an organization, just in terms of the future of work, in terms of responding to this ever-changing, very, very fast-paced, dynamic world that we're living in. It's like, okay, let's catch up with what's going on in the world, and really think about how businesses need to shift gears in order to sort of stay relevant.
Yes. Well, that's so.
How did I do with the gauntlet?
So I mean, I think you sort of gave a little bit of the origin story about like why it, what it's in response to. I think one thing I'm curious about, Holacracy seems to resemble, for me, I don't know if are you a doodler? Is that much?
A doodler?
A doodler, yeah. Do you doodle?
do I doodle?
Yeah. Like on the phone.
I have doodled. Yeah.
Like you don't self-identify as a doodler, but it's like that's funny. It's like I have doodled in the past. I've
just never been asked that question. That's all. That's why I'm a bit stumped with it. But yeah, I doodle.
Yeah, okay, that's cool. I think the pictures I've seen of Holacracy represent like a doodle that I used to do in high school, which is like a series of circles filled with other circles. Which I don't know if I'm a math person as well. It's like they represent like Apollonian circles, where there's big circles and little circles all packed together. This is the glass frog, which is one of the entry points I've seen of Holacracy, like how people actually organize all of these different roles. And I'm wondering if like you could just like get into the nitty gritty a little bit of like how you talk about this idea of the operating system and changing the operating system of the company. And my passing understanding of Holacracy is that you actually organize not into a sort of cascading hierarchy, but into packed circles of influence and responsibility.
Yeah, so I see where you were going with the doodling thing a little bit now, and now I've started drawing circles in front of me. So you've influenced my doodling as well. So the organization structure within a Holacracy powered organization looks very different to that of a traditional hierarchical company. And that linear hierarchy is one we're all really familiar with, kind of like a family tree almost, right? Like you've got, your MD or your CEO at the top, and you've got lines coming down, and then you've got sort of different hierarchical levels, which tend to equate to sort of reporting levels of who you're reporting into. And so you can see this sort of like linear pathway to the MD via, various people that you report into or who maybe tell you what to do, etc. So the Holacracy organizational structure looks very different, and it's based on circles. The idea of that comes from holons, which is the idea of something which is a whole entity that is able to serve its purpose, but may also exist within a larger holon. as well. So a circle within a holacracy organization can have a purpose and it can have full autonomy to do whatever it needs to do to serve that purpose. But it might also exist within a broader circle that has a broader purpose connected to the organization. But the smaller circle, it doesn't mean, just because it's sort of within a broader circle, it doesn't mean that it's any less whole or any less able to serve its purpose, and act autonomously to serve its purpose. So that's the idea behind the circles, is that it comes from the idea of a holon, which is obviously then leads to the word holacracy in itself. So it's all about whole entities. So kind of like biology, actually, if you think of cells within your body, cells within organs, etc. Everything within your body has full autonomy to do whatever it needs to do to serve its purpose, which ultimately is to keep you alive.
Now, of course, people.
But
sorry, go ahead. Sorry for interrupting.
No, I was just going to say, but then that breaks down, just because the purpose overall is to keep you alive. A cell within your body is going to have a particular purpose, and it doesn't need to get permission to do whatever it needs to do to keep you alive. It's it has that purpose, and it can get on and do what it needs to do.
Now, a person might exist in more than one holon, right? They have
Correct.
roles that would be so. It's not to say that, because I want to talk about power in organizations and permission and how decisions get made, because it's not to say in the holon that there's necessarily a democracy. There may still be a person whose job it is to decide.
Well, decisions are clearly laid out within a holacracy. So one of the key points is that you get clarity around what role or what holon or what circle has the authority to make what decisions. But you made a really good point there that, a circle or a role within a holacracy organization is not necessarily a person. So we design these holons around what the business needs in order to serve its purpose. And secondary to that, you then sort of fit the humans into that system. So, someone might fill a role in a number of different circles, but what we're focused on is that these holons represent what needs to be done within the organization.
Yeah. And so one of the things, there's so many things buzzing around my head, but I think one of the questions I have is, what makes a good corporate conversation? And we're definitely talking about multiple levels here, because we're talking about like the big circle, which is the whole organization, what makes a good whole company conversation. But then there's also these smaller circles that also need to be having good conversations. So how would you define what makes a good corporate conversation at all the different levels of the holacracy?
For me, a good corporate conversation is one where key problems or issues get surfaced. Because I think part of the problem within corporate organizations is that maybe the flow of communication isn't two-way. So information might be coming sort of down the hierarchical chain of command, if you like, but there isn't necessarily the forum for that communication and knowledge and information to go back up the chain. And so what holacracy really does is allows conversations to happen at all parts and functions and levels of the organization in a way that any problems, any innovations, any new ideas, any challenges can be surfaced in order to be resolved.
How does it do that? In what sense? Because I know that there's definitely this idea of, a bottleneck in an organization, and if power is distributed where there's more at the top and less at the bottom, there's definitely everything has to go through one person or through one department. How does holacracy actually help organizations to achieve that agility?
Well, the idea in each circle is that the circle is autonomous. to serve its purpose. So one of the key things is that within each circle, which you might ordinarily relate to being a team, is another way of describing it. So within each circle, you have a really clearly defined purpose for that circle. And then that circle has full autonomy to do whatever it needs to do to fulfill that purpose. Now, one of the tools in order to help that happen is that you have tactical meetings whereby the team or the role holders within that circle get together and just kind of sync up. So you get transparency around sort of key facts and figures, anything that's going on, any projects. You come together, they're all updated. And then there's a really specific part of the tactical meeting called the triage round, where any tension that is sensed by any role holder within that circle can get put onto the agenda in real time. And one at a time, they are talked through in order to identify a next action that's going to reduce that tension. So that triage round within the tactical meeting happens in every single team within a Holacracy organization. And so there's a really sort of explicit encouraging of any issues or problems or ideas to be voiced and raised. If there is a situation whereby it can't be resolved within that immediate circle, there's a function called the rep link, which connects the smaller circle to the broader circle that it sits within. And so that if it's something that needs to be handled within a different area of the business or within a different circle, then that rep link is a specific function to take that tension and represent it and voice it and get it resolved in another part of the business.
So that person, that rep link, they are the connector. It's a specific job of a person to make sure that the different scales are connected.
Yeah, it's a really specific role within every circle, that every circle can connect with its broader circle via this role, the rep link. But really interestingly, there is another role called the lead link, whose accountabilities are more around getting information from the broader circle into the smaller circle. And that's a really new idea. It's very, very different to the traditional hierarchy. Whereas, if you sort of visualize that linear structure of the traditional hierarchy, the same person, if you're in your job and you've got any kind of problem or question or idea, it's the same person that you would go to get that information to go up the chain as would bring you information that you need from higher up the chain in order to do your job. It's the same individual.
But is Holacracy saying that they must be different or that they can be different?
They must be different. So they are defined as separate roles, and constitutionally they must be held by different people as well.
So this is, wow, there's so many questions I have. And it's really, really helpful to get down to the nitty-gritty. And I would love at some point to maybe try to visualize this through an example, but it seems like, is there a minimum number of people required in order to make Holacracy function? Because I was under the impression that, you could have 3 or 4 people, but it's obviously at that moment, there's not a lot of need for a rep link or a lead link because, or maybe there is, I don't know.
At that sort of level with 3 or 4 people, you can absolutely use Holacracy, but you'd probably only have one circle in your organization anyway. You may at a push have 2. You just sort of have one sub-circle within the broader circle, but you may only have one circle with that number of individuals within the business.
So I want to talk a little bit about time, because in meetings are obviously a really important core thing that happens in every organization. And these tactical meetings sound to me, it's very interesting because I think Holacracy has a very, pardon the term, new agey feel, where there's a lot of, we're talking about the future and there's a lot of big ideas, and it's about fluidity, but at the core, the structure is actually very, I don't want to say rigid, but very firm. The tactical meetings are highly organized designs for a conversation. You say, like, these are the people who can speak. This is how you're who's allowed to make a decision about what based on roles. And it seems like it's trying to alleviate one of the very common challenges of who has permission to make a decision. And I know that in large organizations, it's sometimes very unclear who has permission and how to obtain permission to do anything. And so it seems like the tactical meeting is trying to sort of solve, and the circles are trying to solve this question of who has permission to do something, who has permission to speak when. But can people feel hemmed in by holacracy? Is there too much structure for some people?
That's definitely a reaction that some people can have. And actually, it's a reaction that I had in the early days, that it just felt a bit uncomfortable, and it felt a bit unusual to be in a meeting it felt a little bit like being back at school for me, where, you've got the teacher, which in my mind was what the facilitator was doing in the early days when I was very new to it. And the teacher was kind of telling you, okay, Sally, yeah, you can talk now. No, you can't talk anymore. It's this person's turn. And it was so structured and processed, and it felt peculiar. And it can feel peculiar because it's a new way of doing things. But quite quickly, I run public workshops to introduce people to holacracy. So I see a lot of people experiencing it for the first time. And that's a very common reaction. But generally, people, once you've sort of been able to zoom back out of that initial tension in you about being told what you can and can't do in a meeting space, once you let go of that and you zoom back out, the bigger picture is that the discipline of that process creates a huge amount of freedom. Because when the process is being held, which means you have times when you can speak and you can't speak, what it means, okay, you might have to hold on to a thought at one time, but actually what that means is that you're focusing on the person that's actually brought the tension, and things can get done because the conversation isn't being overloaded with different opinions, loads of different people's perspectives, put all the sort of the emotion on top of that as well. All of those layers are stripped away, and you stay really focused on what are we trying to resolve here. But in addition to that, you also very, very quickly become aware that there is time for you to be heard. So you can really sort of relax into that place of, okay, I can't speak now, that's fine, but it's okay, because I know that if I've got something important to say that's going to serve the purpose of this organization, then I will have my turn. So it really creates a lot of freedom. It can really reduce levels of stress in a meeting. And quite quickly, I find when people are new to holacracy, you get that realization. Okay, it can be confrontational at the start, but actually when you can zoom out and see how valuable that discipline can actually be to creating freedom, and as a result, innovation, creativity, etc.
So it seems like, I think in a normal meeting that is sort of unstructured, or, what I would say undesigned, what you're talking about is that many people may speak, there may be an agenda, there may not be an agenda. The meeting may start late, it may go over time. How do you guys manage inside of a tactical meeting like this if there are many issues that need to be brought up? Can a meeting like this still burst its dam, go over its edges, become more than can be handled in that period of time? If somebody's supposed to summarize something in 5 minutes, but it turns out that they actually need 20 to unpack it, like what happens?
So there's sort of two tools, I would say, that are kind of baked into holacracy that really help with this. The first is that the tactical meeting itself is not necessarily where you do the work. It's just really a place to surface tensions and identify next steps to getting them resolved. So in that situation where there's loads going on and there's like a dozen things on the agenda, you're not necessarily spending 15 minutes on each agenda item, having the conversations and doing the work there and then in the meeting. It might just be that the person that senses that tension is able to voice it, and just in voicing it, they are able to identify that one next step for themselves. Or maybe it's just a quick update from another role that means that they've just got that they're able to identify that next step. So it's sort of remembering that this is a triage process. You know, you go to go into hospital and you're triaged. It's that initial, okay, what's wrong? What do you need?
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing in that triage process. What's the
rhythmicity of that sort of communication versus other types of communication in Holacracy? You know, what's the sort of the drumbeat of what different types of communication that Holacracy asks all of these different holons to be having with each other?
The tactical meeting is really quite a fast-paced. I like that idea of the drumbeat. It is quite a fast-paced meeting. The tactical meetings can happen as frequently as you need them to happen, but typically they might be half an hour, 45 minutes once a week, something like that. And it's fast-paced. It's surfacing information and triaging it and identifying next steps, so that everyone in that circle, every role holder, has got a picture of what's going on, can sense into any tensions that might prevent work being done or prevent the team serving its purpose, and get it identified and identify that one next thing that's going to resolve it or reduce it.
Hey, this is Daniel. We're about the halfway point, so this is a great time for you to get up, stretch your legs, get some popcorn, fill up your soda. If you're in the car, stay focused. If you have your hands free, this is also a great moment to head over to theconversationfactory.com to sign up for the newsletter. I send out more detailed write-ups, insights, and tools from these conversations, and I'd love to share them with you. So head over to theconversationfactory.com and stay in the loop.
Other meetings within the Holacracy framework might be less fast-paced, and the governance meeting is one of those, which is a good example of a meeting that it's far more important in that meeting to sort of slow down, because what you're doing in the governance is potentially changing the laws of the organization. Like, you might be changing who is making a decision. It's no longer relevant for this role to make this decision, so we're going to move it to another role. Or we've got a gap in the work that actually needs an additional role to be created. That's quite sort of big stuff, big governance stuff within the organization, and that meeting process does tend to be a much slower pace.
And does it also happen less frequently, or I guess it would be up to the particular speed of the organization?
Again, it's entirely up to the needs of the organization, and the meeting frequency can respond to the needs of the organization in that way. So in every circle, you have a secretary role, and the secretary's function, one of the secretary's functions is to schedule the meetings as they are needed for the circle. So if you're going through some big changes in the organization, you might need a governance meeting. You might need several in the space of a couple of days, or you might need one a week for a little while. And then you might get to a place where actually everything's sort of working quite smoothly, and maybe there's less changes going on. And that might change to one a month or one a quarter even. So it really depends on the activities of the circle, and the frequency of those meetings adapts to the team's needs.
It's very interesting to think about this sort of the breath, the respiration, the heart rate of this organization, that there's this quick meeting that is happening a lot, and that there's this slower meeting that's happening whenever it needs to.
As needed, yeah.
Is there something in the middle between those two that Holacracy says these are the types of meetings that that these holons require to be able to be orchestrated effectively?
Holacracy quite cleverly doesn't have a voice on that or an opinion on that. And the reason being, Holacracy in itself is a relatively sort of skeletal set of processes and governance.
And sorry, for those of us who are not British, when you say skeletal, you mean
skeletal,
skeletal,
like a skeleton.
Yeah. No, I. It took me a second, and so I know that other people might not know that you mean aluminum and not aluminium.
Lost,
totally
lost in translation.
Skeletal. Yeah. So
Yeah.
You're saying the holacracy is this is something interesting, actually. You said earlier that in a way, like, holacracy is a set of principles that says, like, look, you should be organizing in this way. This is the fundamentals of a good corporate conversation. You should be in a group of people that have the ability to meet their purpose, and you should be talking to the other bits who have other purposes, that you have a big shared purpose. But other than that, these things, there's a lot of things that you, as a holacracy coach, have to fill in. Right, the actual organization of some of these meetings, helping them figure out how to do how much everyone should get paid, and other sorts of nitty gritty things.
Yeah, I mean, what it means is that holacracy can be used in pretty much any organization across any sector, any industry of any size. Because things like, well, how many other meetings should you be having? Well, how many other meetings do you need? You know, you probably do need to have a strategy meeting, or maybe you do need to have marketing meetings to, you know, collaborate on the latest marketing campaign, or, you know, but that's that, you know, no one sort of framework is going to fit every organization. So yes. This is where holacracy really provides the basic framework to structure and provide autonomy and transparency, etc. But it doesn't, you know, it won't tell you exactly what you do in your business day to day, because only you know that.
It's fascinating. You know, I think one of the reasons why I thought it would be very interesting to speak with you is that when I look at holacracy, I see a very interesting design for the corporate conversation. And there's some things that it is designing for, and there's some things that it's not designing for. It's not saying this is how you should pay people. It's not telling you all the other meetings that you should be doing. It is giving you some very fundamental design guidelines for how the organizational conversation should happen. You talked about this idea of the operating system, which I'm not a huge fan of that metaphor, but I'm wondering if we can just like take it a little bit further. If you're saying that I think the idea is that everyone's a PC because we're running the linear thing, and we should become Macs, which is all, or, you know, the holons and self-organization. Is there another operating system that's on the shelf that people could choose from, or is it just linear and holacracy? Are there, you know, like you said, if you were consulting to an organization and they're like, well, we're interested in holacracy, but we need this and this. Is there an organization where you could say, oh, holacracy is actually not right for you. You need this third type of operating system, or I'm going to give you a blended operating system?
Holacracy is a method of self-organizing, of self-management. So in terms of your sort of Windows Mac analogy, I think the two sort of main principles that we're talking about here is that your Windows might be your traditional linear hierarchy, and your Mac is a method of self-management, of which holacracy is one. Sociocracy is another, on which holacracy is loosely based. For me and my world, like, holacracy is like, you know, the 4.0 of sociocracy. It's sort of it's taking a lot of holacracy but developing it so that it's much more tangible and usable for businesses. So if sociocracy didn't feel right, and if holacracy didn't feel right, but an organization wanted to switch to a method of self-management, then there are ways of doing self-management in a more kind of free flow style. But interestingly, I find a lot of the businesses that coming to me are actually ones that are already doing a sort of self-designed method of self-management and have hit sort of their limits of that, because they want to grow or because they're getting too busy. And so what Holacracy does, it's self-management, but it comes with sort of a layer of structure and governance that supports growth, scalability. So yeah, there are alternatives, and I think the Windows Mac thing is what you're talking about is linear hierarchy compared to self-management, and Holacracy is just one method of that.
That's fair. That's actually really helpful. And can you talk a little bit about self-management? Because I think this has come up a couple of times. It seems like each person, when you're talking about that tactical meeting, there actually is a lot of self-management there that you're talking through. There's this feeling of, will I be heard? And the social contract of knowing that if I am heard, if I hear others, I will also be heard. And managing my own experience in that tactical meeting, but there's also self-management, and I'm guessing in other contexts or other scales in Holacracy that maybe I don't understand. Can you talk a little bit about like what self-management means at all the scales that Holacracy helps design for?
Self-management, I would say you can sort of look at it in two different angles. There's the self-management from the team, the collective, or the organization, the business perspective. And that's the very sort of tangible piece that Holacracy supports around, transparency in these tactical meetings and triaging and governance, like changing decisions and making sure there's that clarity. The other piece of it, which is the sort of the angle that I think I very much came from, which is more of the inner work side of things and the more of just the self-management as an individual. And one of the examples of that, and it kind of comes back to your point about time that you were talking about earlier in these meetings, a really key part of that triage process in the tactical meeting is that we ask the question, what do you need? We don't ask the question, what is your tension? So at the start of, and just that shift in that question alone just points to this self-management that what you're trying to get to is a place where, and I think it can be really difficult for people because it's not something that we're used to. We're not necessarily even used to our tensions and problems being heard at all, let alone figuring out how to resolve them and sort of coming to the table with that. What do I need to resolve it? So it's a real sort of lesson, I suppose, in knowing that you are trusted to identify these tensions. You have an opportunity to voice it, but the next step is you actually have an opportunity to do something about it. And that can be pretty new in some business cultures. And that for me really points to that level of self-management, which is very much on the individual scale.
It's very interesting because in design thinking, we really try to get people to think about needs versus solutions. When I'm doing design research, I'll go and I'll identify pain points and tensions existing in the current space, and then I ask people to really not go straight to solutions, but talk about the need. And it's very interesting that you ask people to not just say this is the problem, but to really identify a need, and that is a level of self-management to already process the tension and to deliver it to somebody as a clearer ask.
Yeah. And that's something that really evolves. It's not necessarily, you're not necessarily expected to be able to sort of come to the table when Holacracy is first introduced to your organization with that skill and that art of doing that. And that's okay. If you're coming to the table with, I don't know what I need, but this is the tension, then that's great too. And it's just a question of working with whatever point people are able to come to, with the knowledge that that's where we're trying to get to is that development of, I suppose, personal skills in being able to identify what do you need.
Yeah, and also what seems to be clear to me in the design of Holacracy is this idea of, if there's a need, then there should be an action. And if there's an action, there should be somebody who is responsible to take it in a self-organizational sort of way, just to say that it is somebody's responsibility, and also somebody has the ability to do it if they see that it is a problem.
Yeah.
So I want to take a step back, and maybe like there's like a 35,000 foot view as well. Like one of the things that I've been thinking a lot about with conversation design is, it's really interesting because I know one of the things that I have found in my design thinking work is that design thinking helps organizations. There's a lot of how will a team get to innovative ideas together. There's a lot of functionality that helps groups work together. There's also this idea of pulling things from the outside of the organization and digesting that information and bringing it to the inside of the organization. So I was very aware of the outer to inner conversation. Design pulls in insights from the world, brings them into a team, that team digests them. And one of the challenges that I've seen is that organizations that have bad permission structures, and there's no design in some of the work that I've done in the past for, well, what do we do with these innovative ideas now? You know, when you go into an organization, you say, like, well, we're going to be more innovative. We're going to teach you innovation. People get this knowledge. Design thinking really helps people do that. But then there's no organization structure to help those ideas get metabolized and turned into action. And that's something that's one of the things that I think is sort of interesting to me about Holacracy, is that it seems to, especially when you're talking about these roles that connect the different circles, that there's actually a role whose function is to figure out how to move knowledge around different levels or areas of the organization.
Yeah, I mean, those roles are really important, and they're a really key part of the information flow within an organization. But I also think that there's no limits within a holacracy-powered organization that a couple of roles within completely different circles can't get together to have a conversation. I think that's one of the big misconceptions about holacracy, that because you've got these two meeting processes, which are the tactical and governance meeting, they're really clearly defined in the Constitution, because you've got these roles and circles, that in some way limits anything else from happening. And the absolute opposite is true, that actually there is more chance of you being able to go ahead and do something in a holacracy organization than there is without holacracy. Because actually what we're saying is, unless it's explicitly defined that you can't do something, go ahead and do it if it's in the pursuit of the purpose of the organization and you're not knowingly harming the organization. If those two things are true, go ahead and do it. And so conversations can happen in a number of different ways outside these circles and outside the tactical and governance meeting process. And that for me is a really important message in what holacracy is about. For me, the processes of the tactical and governance meeting are so powerful. What I have done in the past is actually taken that process and sort of redesigned it a little bit to suit the work that we were needing to do. But I actually still kind of put a process and a framework into just a project meeting that we were having within the organization, because the discipline created the freedom, and it made space for creativity within just a regular project meeting within the organization. So it's a really important message, actually, that conversations can happen in a number of different ways and across different roles and circles within a holacracy-powered organization. It's not limited.
Right. And what you seem to be saying is that some of the design principles of the governance meeting and the design principles of the tactical meeting, separating out needs and tensions, separating out threads and addressing things in a linear fashion, that you adapt some of those design principles to other necessary meetings that arise inside of an organization.
Yeah, because those processes enable I suppose, skills, like interpersonal skills to develop, the skill of speaking from role and defining what role you're speaking from and what role you're speaking to, the skill of handling one tension at a time, the skill of defining what you need and not just about what the problem is, and the depths of listening. All of those things, all of those skills are really nurtured within the tactical and governance meeting processes. And I think they just sort of naturally spill out and inform other conversations, other designs of conversation in other spaces within the business. Yeah. They don't have to. There's nothing to say they have to, right? But it's just my experience that the skills are actually beneficial.
Yeah. And
to other conversations.
What would you say those skills are? Like if they were, when we're talking about putting the process of a meeting over the people, what are those skills that help us manifest that?
Listening is definitely one of them. Clarity. What's the question? What skills? What are the skills that are needed?
Well, yeah, you're talking about like how we will. The tactical meeting and the governance meeting are these sort of primary archetypal meetings in Holacracy, and that there are some aspects of them that get sort of seeded into the other meetings. And I'm just wondering, like, what those characteristics, what those design principles are, in my parlance.
The design principles, I would say, are based around clarity, the focus on getting things done, focus on one at a time, a process of allowing everyone to speak and sort of maybe give their perspective, but just once without any crosstalk. All those sorts of things just nurture this sense of space, of listening, of safety. And those conditions are the conditions for me that are really sort of fertile soil for creativity and teamwork.
I'm wondering, I want to shift gears a little bit because we have only a little bit of time left together. And I want to make sure that we're talking about, if there's something that we're not talking about that we should be talking about. Is there anything that like we've missed that you think is important for us to address about how Holacracy works, how it works for you, what's interesting about it in your world and in your life? If there's anything that we haven't addressed so far that you think is important for us to address.
I suppose one of the things that comes up for me when you kind of create that space for, what are we not talking about here that we need to talk about, is the sort of the like slowing down. And it was in my early days of practicing Holacracy that I came across a proverb, and it says, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And that, for me, really resonated at the time. And I feel like it's a really important part of what Holacracy is. The kind of the new age bit that you were talking about earlier. And I think there is a sort of a new age element to Holacracy, as much as there are a number of sort of processes and discipline. And I think that new age part is just potentially like a slowing down and a connecting in order to actually go further. And that's one of the things that I think Holacracy, it's not necessarily something that you're aware of in the early days of practicing Holacracy, but it's the depths that Holacracy can bring, not just to your business, but to you as an individual and to your life, is a sense of being able to go further when we're working together. And I think it's sort of an area that's had quite a big impact on my life outside of working, within a business. It can have quite a profound effect on your life, which is one of the things that we need to be thinking about when we're thinking about the future of work, right? It's our well-being, it's our humanness, it's connecting to each other, and it's an ecosystem that's broader than just ourselves, or broader than even just the business that we work for. It's like the whole ecosystem of how everything is connecting and working together that sort of feels a bit broken for
Yes.
me. And I'm not saying holacracy is the silver bullet solution by any means, but it does it brings something that I think is important to that whole aspect of how we work.
Well, and what is that? I mean, how does it affect the person who's inside of this system? What is the change that it brings to that individual?
I think it kind of brings clarity, which can productivity. It can bring a focus on purpose rather than, focus on target or a deadline. So it can really enhance the purpose of why you're doing things, which in itself can sort of improve engagement and how you feel about what you're doing. And that can really spill into your whole life, not just who you are when you show up at work, a sense of purpose. And because you've got this clarity around what role you're speaking from, and when you're in the tactical meeting versus the governance meeting, and the clarity around defining what do you need, when things become far more explicit, you create far more space for us as human beings as well. So I think it can take pressure off. It can really improve well-being.
How does it do that? I mean, you talked about how inner work in the other interview that I listened to you talking about this. You talked about how the inner work is essential. Because it seems you mentioned that holacracy is very skeletal. Is it inherent to holacracy, or is it something that is emergent from holacracy?
I would say it's kind of both. I hope that wasn't binary question. Is it this or is it this? I do think it can be both. I think it's inherent in a holacracy practice, if you are committed to it, that inner work is part and parcel of that. Like, for example, just to develop that skill of coming to a meeting with what do I need rather than what is the problem. Right there, holacracy is asking you to sort of take on that inner work of recognizing other people's and respecting the time that other people are giving to this meeting, recognizing the importance of that time and space together. And so doing some of the work outside of that space and figuring out, what role am I sensing this in? What is the problem? Have I got any ideas to resolve it? Who do I need to involve in order to resolve it? Can I actually resolve it on my own? Do I need to bring it to this meeting at all? Like, all of those things can only come once you trust that there is a space for you to be heard. Because why would you bother doing all of that work if there's no space for you to be heard in the first place? So I think part of it is absolutely inherent, but I also think it's possible to kind of function within a holacracy and not sort of commit and not take on that work as well. So it's really a question of both.
Well, because so it sounds like what you're saying, it's very interesting. There's somebody who in a holacracy who could just be focused on just working directly with customers and just doing whatever work they're doing. They could just be sweeping the floors.
Yep.
And they're not necessarily the connectors or the structural glue. They may not be particularly interested in that sort of work. That may not be their purpose.
Yeah, 100%. And if that's not your purpose and all you want to do is come into work and sweep the floors and then leave again, then you have full permission within a holacracy-powered organization to do that. Full permission. So holacracy is really an invitation. It's an invitation about how much you want to step into your role, step into the broader purpose of the organization, or just fill your role and just do that to the best of your ability. That invitation is absolutely there, and it's up to you how you wish to respond to it.
So in the end, it sounds to me like the way that the self-management that holacracy is sort of asking us to utilize at these different levels is asking us to be very, very much aware of what we're choosing, right?
Yeah, be conscious of your choices, 100%, because it enables you to take that choice. So yeah, make them consciously. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, from a design thinking perspective, one of the things that I teach people is very much that everything around us is designed, and that it's our job to either design them intentionally or leave them as they are, but to make that conscious choice to say, this will be remade. It was made and it can be remade. And I think some people look at the structures of an organization and say it's just the way things are. And what's really interesting is that you're saying, well, let's have a moment and inquire about whether it is functioning for all of the people who are working with it.
Yeah.
And if it's not, then we should examine it and then remake it.
Yeah.
What's still troubling to me, and I'm sorry to harp on this, is that it's interesting because there's some things that Holacracy does design for, and then there's some things where you need someone who's just good at organizational design, I guess, to rethink how it's done. Like, Holacracy doesn't tell us how to do all of those things. You, Sally, as a Holacracy coach, will tell us to do that. I'm just trying to separate those two things out. It's maybe it's an artificial designation, but does that make sense?
It does make sense, and I can completely see what you're speaking to, and that's part of my role as a coach to acknowledge that and support that upskilling, if you like, of not just identifying what the problem is, but to be thinking through how you can resolve it. And does that mean that what you're actually, what you're proposing here is a bit of a change in the design of the organization? And because that's quite a big power to be holding. It's a big responsibility. So it's particularly in the early days when an organization adopts Holacracy, it's managing that process and providing a space where people can step into that role and that function as and when they are ready to, in a way that's going to positively support the organization.
What keeps you going through this, Ali? It seems like you have a really fundamental joy in connecting with people. Is that one of the things that sort of like drives some of the work you do?
Yeah, I mean that's completely the sort of the angle that I came to Holacracy from, which was, as a senior leader in a global organization, just feeling all these tensions that I wasn't, some of which I was able to resolve and some of which I wasn't. And the frustration as a human being of being in an organization that I couldn't help to make better.
Mm.
And so I think at the heart of the reason that I ultimately became a Holacracy coach and love what I do is that for me the foundation is it's about supporting human beings. Because the business, the business is just a business anyway. It's sort of like it's an intangible thing. What makes it tangible, what makes it real, is the human beings that have created it or are working in it or are talking with the customers or doing the work, whatever. And so yeah, 100% of the thing that sort of drives me above and beyond Holacracy in itself is making life better for us humans. And whether that means connecting with each other or giving each other more space, or it's making life better for humans is at the heart of it.
Well, that is an outrageous and radical idea that that a company should serve the people instead of the other way around. The people should thrive in the company. It seems like a hilariously radical idea that a company thrives if the people thrive. And I think sometimes the company thinks that they need to thrive at the expense of the people. And it sounds like you're saying that let's take care of the people and And that's the most important part.
Yeah, completely. And, and then you could have me talking for another hour now about, the spin-off for the environment and just the ecosystem and, just generally how we look after the world is just so important. And, the future of work and how we operate in business is just one strand of that. But there's a whole other spin-off for sort of economics and politics and for us as a society, which, let's not go down that rabbit hole today.
I know, because we're definitely at the end of our time together, but that's a whole other thread. I had no idea.
It is for me. It's like, it is the driving force. It's just looking at, okay, let's not put the business first above all else. I'm not saying let's not have a business, let's not serve the purpose, because businesses are an incredible force for good. It's just saying sort of let's get the balance right, like the concept of ecosystem right, whereby the two can coexist without causing harm. That's the shift that holacracy sort of represents for me.
It's beautiful stuff. Sally, we're definitely at the edge of our time together. I really appreciate how generous you've been with your time and your expertise, and this has been really illuminating for me.
Well, thank you for your challenging questions. It's been great for me too.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate you being as honest and open as you've been. We I hope to continue the conversation in another another avenue.
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, and this has been awesome.
Thank you.
And we're going to leave it right there. Thanks for sticking around. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on iTunes or Google Play. Thanks for your fine attention, and I'll see you next time.